2 months ago, I wound up thinking that I was recording, and it wound up I was actually recording the AI. So I didn't take any notes, and about a month later, when I thought, oh, well, I better put this up, and it was like, uh, little housekeeping items. Please put your mic on mute unless you're doing the talking to keep background quiet. I'm going to be putting some links in the chat. We don't have to stop the conversation, but I'm going to do that a little bit later. I had sent out the approval of the meeting minutes along with the Zoom link. If I could get somebody, a member, for the members, if you have read the minutes and there's no corrections or deletions or anything, objections with it, can I get a motion to accept the meeting minutes? Okay, we will defer that then. We're going to defer the treasurer's report till Frank gets in here, seeing how he wasn't able to get his link up and running there. We're going to go right over to the governmental report. We had no feedback from any of the groups except for our friend Roger there on the line and from the Lake Erie West Regional Council. And he's going to be giving some comments from our friends portion of this meeting.
Glenn, I can give a couple of federal government related updates that may be
Oh,
of interest to the group.
please do. Thank
Okay,
you.
one of them is that the CRISI grant, which is the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grant, is currently available for applications through June 22nd. The only one I know of in this area is that the Wheeling and Lake Erie Railroad has applied for improvements to their bridge over the Maumee River, which is the second swing bridge if you're going north. So there's the NS swing bridge, the Wheeling and Lake Erie swing bridge, and then the CSX swing bridge. So this is the Wheeling and Lake Erie. So they're looking for a federal grant to do improvements to that swing bridge. So that's June 22nd that federal money is available. Also, I heard there's a possibility that the federal and state partnership grant program may not be funded in the future. That grant is used especially for states that have the corridor ID projects. That's a big grant for moving corridor ID projects forward. So that's something to definitely take a look at or keep an eye on, because if that grant is not renewed, that would make it difficult for states to find federal money to move their corridor ID projects forward.
So that means the stage two portion might be, we
Well,
might be
it
having a
won't be
problem.
stage two. I think it'll be a little further beyond stage two. So I think it'll be at the point where they're actually starting to do some construction. They might be able to move through stage two and stage three. It could stall out until that funding is reinstated. Just something to keep an eye on.
Thanks, Roger. We're going to go with our guest speaker now. Larry Thompson is the vice president of Northern Indiana Passenger Rail Association, and I met Larry at the Ohio Rail Summit when he came to me and presented an idea. It impressed me enough. I asked him to go ahead and come on up and talk to us about it. So, Larry, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and fine thing that we were able to get together when we were down in Columbus. I'm glad that happened. I am speaking not for NIPRA because we got our hands full with one great big Midwest Connect, the Indiana portion, and we're right in the midst of trying to get some commitment for further payment of part two of the corridor ID. I have told them that I am not officially representing NIPRA as I'm talking to you about this route that I have in mind. I've learned a lot in the last several weeks, Glenn, after I left you, about what I want to get done. I'm talking about, I think there's been discussion over the last few years, the Fort Wayne and Toledo connection. I should put it Toledo-Fort Wayne connection. You guys are first today. And we are interested in that. However, to stand on its own, it's going to have to become a Toledo, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis. We're going to be working with Indiana Passenger Rail Association. I am. I've already approached the president, and we've discussed that a couple of weeks ago when he was here for a meeting to get that going, the Fort Wayne to Indianapolis portion, which is approximately about a 120-mile trip. That goes down, leaves Fort Wayne and then goes down to Muncie, which is Ball State University. Maybe some of you have heard of that. Over west to Anderson, Indiana, and then into Indianapolis. Of course, Indianapolis is just like Columbus, Ohio, one of those growing metropolis areas. The city itself isn't growing so much, but the outlying areas are. You know, they're talking well over 1 million people population in that particular area. The next part of it is KIPDA, which is the Kentucky Indiana Regional Planning and Development Agency in Louisville, is working on the Indianapolis and Louisville portion with a corridor ID project underway at this time. I believe they're ready to move also, just like NOPRA has not officially, but unofficially moved into the second portion of the corridor ID project. They split that earlier this year into two parts, and I have a feeling it has something to do with what Glenn talked about a minute ago, the funding. They probably didn't want to commit to the whole amount at that point, which was going to be quite a bit more. They did split it into two. So we have our consultant working on the first part of part two. So that's where we are. I think the same thing is true with KIPDA, with the Indianapolis to Louisville. Kentucky had applied for a corridor ID to go from Louisville on down to Nashville, but that was not approved for the go-ahead. I understand quite a bit of interest to get that done because that could open up the whole southern United States to Indianapolis and Louisville, and I think they're very anxious to get that market going. We're anxious to see you get that Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland underway. From what I've heard, which is not anything official, but we think it's a pretty good possibility that that's a project that's going to go ahead. Just think of it this way. What happened if we had Detroit, Toledo, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, Louisville, Nashville? What a route. Wouldn't that be great for us? Bring it back, guys. That's what I'm interested in doing. I don't see that IPRA, or the Indiana Passenger Rail Association, interested in doing the Fort Wayne to Toledo, but I do see some interest between Fort Wayne and Indianapolis. Just like Toledo, we're quite a ways away from our capital city. And so there are times when we think we're really part of Ohio. Trying to get something out of our Indiana legislature is a little bit more difficult than if we were in Indianapolis. Doesn't mean it's impossible, and we've got some irons in the fire to get that support building down in Indianapolis so that we can get that portion done between Fort Wayne and Indianapolis, along with additional support for our NOPRA project, or Midwest Connect, as you would know it. I'm wanting to just encourage you to start looking ahead. We don't know whether corridor ID is going to be opened again, like it was mentioned about a year ago, that was going to happen. A lot of things have happened between then and now. So it might not happen at this point, but I'd like to see you get the initial parts over with. Look at your routing. I looked at your routing and I was real excited because I saw on one map, must have been a really old one, that showed there was a rail going through Toledo to Napoleon, Defiance, and then Fort Wayne. Do you guys know all that? Okay, but I guess they built a trail on part of it. So I don't see that going away. I think that's not going to be possible. What I do see is just a renewal, and that shouldn't be too hard, of what Amtrak already does between Toledo and Waterloo on twice daily each way. What this would be with going south at Butler, Indiana, which is about 10 miles east of Waterloo, and then heading down to New Haven and then into Fort Wayne, Indiana. That route is pretty much operated by Norfolk Southern. All the track would be Norfolk Southern all the way.
Yeah,
And
it is. Yeah, that's NS from Butler down to that line goes to Decatur. It's part of a line that comes out of I think Oakwood Yard in the Detroit area and crosses there. But they've been, ever since that 99 merger, they've been running Toledo to Peru on that route.
I often get stopped at the railroad crossing in New Haven as it's coming down there because it goes right across the road that I take quite often. And it is a busy route, as I understand, even the route from Toledo going straight west from there gets quite busy since they moved a lot of the freight off of the former Pennsylvania line down here up to that Waterloo route. Somebody said, well, I don't know if they're going to want to add more trains on that, whether Norfolk and Southern. However, I feel like we have at NIPRA and I'm wearing my NIPRA hat real quickly here, but I'll take it off again, have a pretty good relationship with Norfolk and Southern, at least to sit down and talk with them and let them see that we think this is something that they could benefit by and also us. Guys, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm a cheerleader. I'm not an organizer. I'm not a guy to get on there and do all the dirty work because I'm old. But I am interested in something for our kids and our grandkids and feel like we're on the cusp of this Amtrak coming back, passenger rail for the United States. And I think we can be part of it just as much as the Northeast Corridor, with more frequent trains and more destinations. And I think we've got a good one here, particularly when you hook on Detroit. We have a lot of connection between Fort Wayne and Detroit because of the General Motors plant we have here. As I understand it, there's a lot of companies that have those same connections as far down as Anderson and Indianapolis, Indiana. And then you've got Cummins Diesel down south of Indianapolis in Columbus, Indiana. We feel there's industrial support, if we could get it, should be not that hard to get. One of the things we do for our financing here of Midwest Connect is we're connected with a rail industry in our area that every quarter sends us a nice check, and that's how we build up our treasury. I have no idea. I don't know Toledo. I don't know Northeast Ohio that well, but I have a feeling that you don't have to do this yourselves. We're using county governments, we're using local governments, we're using people that give grants out. We have connections to several of them here in our area that are interested in seeing this economic development project. And we have to remember, as I've listened to so many different Zoom meetings on passenger rail, it is an economic development thing. Keep that in the forefront of all of our appeals. It will help Toledo. It will help Bryan, Ohio. It will help anybody along the way that has contact with the railroad. So Glenn, I guess that's my pitch for today. What I have hopes of is when you have the Toledo Passenger Rail Association meeting coming up in October, we're going to be there, and we have made contact with IPRA is planning to also have their president there. And I'm just hoping maybe some of us can sit down for a little while just to talk it over and see where we are and where we might want to be. I just think that would be a real good ideal time. Let's take the temperature and see what might be.
Thanks, Larry. Does anybody have any questions for Larry?
Now, I have a question, Glenn. What
Yes.
other groups are there for passenger rail advocacy in Indiana?
Just basically ours in Northern Indiana Passenger Rail Association, and the Indiana Passenger Rail Association, which is based in Indianapolis, and they represent themselves as being mostly a center part of the state. They have no project like we do up here.
What's that one called?
Indiana Passenger Rail Association, or IPRA. Todd Bassler, who's retired from Lilly Corporation, he's a real good supporter and good friend of ours up in Fort Wayne, but he's based in Indianapolis. Those are the only two organizations that I know are operating at this time.
I'm sure there are a lot of individuals throughout the whole state that would be interested.
I think you're exactly right. We had a rally for rail about a year and a half ago here in Fort Wayne at our Baker Street station, which if any of you know it, it's a historic Union station downtown Fort Wayne. We had 400 people come out without any major advertising. It was just a couple of blips in the newspaper, which hardly anybody reads, and word of mouth. And we felt we had a pretty good representation. We could not have held any more people basically than the 400 we had, but we had very good support from some of our representatives, and the mayor and the representative, the senators were there. I feel like we've got support. Now we just got to get it turned into some votes down in the Indiana legislature and also in the Congress.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
And since we got Frank back with us, I'm going to scoot back to the treasurer's report.
Okay.
I'm gonna sign off. Thank you for lending me an ear, and let's get it.
Absolutely, Larry. I think this is something that needs to be put on our radar. When I lived in Denver, to see how when you put down a rail system and stops, the economic development that happens in those stops is extremely eye-opening. Looking forward to seeing you here in October. We'll definitely be talking. Okay, Frank.
Well, this is since our last meeting, this is like a 2.5 month period, like March, April, and half of May. Thankfully, Alan Corbett, Herb Hoeing, thank you for donations. And we've started merchandise sales again a little bit just because we went down to Columbus. Yeah, we had a pretty good increase there, and we're up to 13,000 beginning of this. Okay, Glenn, that's the credits. That's incoming. I want to talk about incoming a little bit later on also, but one of the big things we also did, we are now trying to join up with, in some way or another, other organizations like DARC for disabilities in the Toledo area here, High Speed Rail Alliance, the RPA, you can see it there, NIPRA. Maybe we ought to think about NPRA, All Aboard Ohio, and membership donation, MARP. Then we also made some purchases, kind of getting on the move a little bit. We needed a computer to kind of store our stuff and to help us out with giving presentations. So we bought a computer, a table, we bought a table cover, and we went down to Columbus. So we spent some money. So that did bring us down a little bit, down to a little bit over 12,000. On the income side, if I'm getting back to that, and Glenn, I don't see it in the agenda, but maybe it's there, is membership. I'm in several other organizations, and I would say, in my opinion, the prime difficulty of getting organizations going, and it should be our number one goal, what people now call capacity, what I used to always call get more members, paying members, and that's a little bit of income. It also gets people involved, and we have more hands on the deck. People pay a little bit of money, they donate some too, maybe. Then they're more willing to be on the board to help us make decisions. They're on the committees to help out at tabling. Hopefully, at next meeting, Glenn, we'll see some memberships there in the credit category.
I'll be sending out a letter later on this month asking for people to join our group. I'll be mentioning about that a little bit later in my chair's report.
Glenn, I've been a member of NOPRA for a long time, and I haven't received any notices about membership dues for at least since before COVID. I don't even know what the dues are, but I never get any information about membership or dues. I don't know whether I owe or not.
Hey, can I step in here? Charles had almost 5 years of credit when he last donated to us.
Oh, really?
Kind of hard for me to say he needs to be, but you might check the records because it's been at least 4 years he didn't have to pay anymore.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'll take a look.
So I'll send you an email later on.
Next, we got my chair's report here. We've been having a busy couple of months. Let me show you what we've been up to. First, we attended the March meeting of the Michigan Association of Rail Passengers, our good old MARP people, and they met at the Detroit Metro Rail building here. And if you haven't been up there, you really need to take a day trip and go up and see this place. It is really, really impressive. The work that went into it, especially the woodwork, because I'm a big woodwork fan. They managed to keep almost all the wood pristine into that area, even though it had rained and there was mold and mildew. They managed to put that wood back together. And the other thing that kind of impressed me, and you can't see it on this film, but up in the upper right hand corner there where you see those kids in front of those screens, up on that ceiling is a huge skylight that goes from one end of the building all the way over to the other. I couldn't get the whole skylight in my picture, but those things go up. It allows for ventilation, and I thought that was pretty interesting. But definitely take the time to go.
Hey, Glenn,
Yeah, Tim.
I just checked the stats I had on previous dues. Charles does need to up his dues. So,
Oh, okay. Thanks, Tim. Then we went to the Lake Erie West Regional Council Transportation Summit. And to show you what the current state of rail is in Ohio, rail only had a 15-minute presentation by John Esterly on the status of the FRA corridors, while the others had 1 hour to present. This isn't the fault of Lake Erie West, as it is more of a call that we need to put our nose to the grindstone and start strongly advocating harder for Amtrak and government officials to get better funding and service routes for passenger rail in this area, especially since this has the ability to be a potential economic driver. And considering the current state of our economy is right now and what's coming down the road at the first of the year, time is of the essence. So hopefully next year at the Transportation Summit, we'll have more to present. We hosted a table and was a sponsor of the Ohio Rail Summit this year. You can't see the computer, but there's our tablecloth, and we used our platform down there to explain why we feel that the Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit corridor should be the one to receive the go-ahead. I got a chance to talk to Stu Nicholson from the Rail Passenger Association about our enthusiasm in supporting the organization's conference in Toledo in October. And I also got a chance to talk to Joe Zabat from Amtrak about the importance of improving rail service in the Toledo area. Another thing that needs to be pointed out to you to show you the level of interest in passenger rail in the state. When they were talking during a panel session, there was no state representatives there. There was no state senators there. Maybe one or two county commissioners, one mayor, and most importantly, nobody from the ORDC. This should tell you that we have a lot to work to do when it comes to improving passenger rail in the state and getting advocates to the table.
Question.
Yes.
Those are individuals and they are important. Are there actually committees that would include passenger rail at the state level, legislature?
I don't know. Roger, would you know anything about that?
What was that question?
Well, you know how like in Congress, U.S. Congress, there's all kinds of committees. They cover everything. Instead of contacting individuals, if we contacted a committee, of course, they're ran by individuals. Are there committees statewide for passenger rail?
That's a good question. I don't know of any. Tell you the truth, Frank.
Well, that would be an avenue, I think.
Yeah, it'd be worth investigating.
Glenn, I can answer that. There is not a committee for rail. So one of All Aboard Ohio's goals is to create a rail committee across the board, both freight and passenger. If you're curious in reading more about an example, the state of Missouri recently established a rail committee within their legislature. So I think that's the model that we want to follow.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Brian, do you have a link that you might be able to put in
A link to what, Glenn?
Missouri's stuff?
Yeah, I found something.
hey, Glenn, yesterday, I know you were on the meeting with ORDC. That's supposed to be an avenue for us, but I didn't think they were very welcoming to public providing feedback.
Oh, no, especially that there was no avenue for people that were calling in. Even though it was a Teams thing, it was only people in the room that were allowed to give comments.
I thought it was a public meeting.
Our next event that we attended was Early Ohio on the Portage event. And I see I have a typo on that thing. It was sponsored by the Wood County Museum and the Maumee Valley Heritage Corridor. We got a very nice response from the people who attended. It was a 2-day event, and after the first day, we got 14 new views on our Facebook page for the Northwest Passenger Rail Association. So we drove a little bit of traffic to that thing. And I can tell you, the overwhelming response to these was that these people really were liking rail, especially one of the things that I brought up the disabled, and that was kind of my hook. I used the example, try getting a motorized wheelchair on a Delta flight. And all of a sudden the light bulb went on. Then they understood. Then I used the bathroom. I says, try to imagine yourself disabled trying to negotiate a bathroom on a Della flight. That allowed me to open their eyes a little bit as to the potential of the need for passenger rail in the public sphere. The next thing we did, I attended a couple economic development meetings, one put on by the Toledo Community Improvement Corporation, and most recently, Lake Erie West Regional Economic Development Council. I'm working now to attend the Lucas County Economic Development Coalition meeting as well. This is part of our strategic planning to be at these economic development meetings. At the Lake Erie West meeting, I suggested that during public comments, that we investigate the development of a regional public banking system like North Dakota. And I brought this up because seeing the last couple of state budgets, public banking appears to be our best choice to get funding needed to improve rail transit in Ohio. I ran across a video of the president of North Dakota's bank, Don Morgan, presenting to the people in New Mexico about the structure and the operations of public banking in North Dakota. And I'll be putting a link into the chat on that. Now, you may remember New Mexico is developing a program to provide free pre-K childcare for all the citizens in the state using the $20 billion windfall that they got off their oil and gas reserves. So I'm curious to know if they're using this money as a vehicle to develop public banking, then fund childcare through that. And I'm looking at that for a very specific reason. This past Wednesday, Today in Ohio reported that the state took in $1.2 billion more in tax revenue than expected. And Facebook yesterday blew up. Everybody had an idea where to spend that money. The increase in tax revenue was mainly from rising costs, taxes, and inflation. And if we could talk to them about taking some of that extra revenue and using it as a springboard for startup funding for public banking, we would have a great start. $500 million would give us approximately $5 billion in investor bonds. Our regional banking effort is part of NOPRA's Plan B, working in conjunction with our support for the National Infrastructure Bank bill that will be in the link in the chat as well. I'm going to go off topic for a minute, bring up something that Tom Galloway and I was talking recently at an event, and I'll let him explain as to what was going on.
Well, if I remember correctly, given everything that's gone on in the past 2 weeks, Glenn and I were talking about the importance of involving local and state candidates in our discussions. And I'm glad to see some of the people here, Easton for one, Diane Blythe for another, to understand what passenger rail means to the region, not only to Northwest Ohio, but getting to other places for disabled people, for seniors, and everybody in between for whom air travel, especially air travel out of Toledo, is almost nil. And get them on board with what NOPRA is doing, as well as what the National Infrastructure Bank is doing, and the projects that are going on right now, while there's still the funding left from the bipartisan infrastructure bank, which is what these corridors that we've been talking about are. I think it would be great if we could have them at our meetings, if we could set up Zoom meetings with them and the National Infrastructure Bank people, who are more than willing to do one-on-one meetings with especially local legislators who are in these areas along these proposed corridors, and let them know that, hey, this is something we can do, and we can do this without any extra taxpayer burden if we can get these public banks set up. Craig Schwartz probably knows more about public banking than almost anybody else in Ohio. He's worked with the folks in North Dakota, as has Glenn, to try to develop a plan for a regional bank as well as a state public infrastructure bank. They have both been with me on this National Infrastructure Bank journey that will go a long way towards funding passenger and higher speed rail, which is earmarked as 20% of the $5 trillion bank. That's one of the things that Glenn and I have talked about and are going to be working on. Tim Porter and I did a lot of this talking with regional legislators before COVID, and we kind of slacked off between COVID and my wife's health misadventures. But it's something that now with Zoom we can do. We can get people to come. If they can't come to the table for one-on-one, they can come to their computer screen. I think that's one of the things that we're going to be doing moving forward.
A couple of days after the Lake Erie West meeting, transportation meeting, The Guardian published a story about transportation in America, which I pointed out. There's a link in the chat for this article. What caught my eye was a comment that was made. I went over to read the article. It says the gap is now so large that for a major American city to bring their public transit up to world-class status, it would involve cost enormous $4.6 trillion, involving 7,500 miles of new dedicated infrastructure for trains and buses over the next 20 years. So I read that report, and then I went over and I actually read the transportation report that article was generated from. And on the very first paragraph, it pretty much said the same thing, but what caught my eye was this. And it says, to approach the high quality, high frequency levels of transit service in globally competitive cities, the United States would need to triple the transit vehicle fleet and build out more than 7,500 miles of new dedicated transit infrastructure in urban areas with populations over 50,000 people. That got me to thinking, what does that mean for Ohio? So I did a little research and I looked for Ohio cities with populations of 50,000 and higher, and here's what I found. There are two takeaways from this. The number of cities in Ohio, which show an enormous amount of work and cost that is going to need to improve transit, rail and bus transit in Ohio. And then the second takeaway made me realize that I need to eat a little crow here in front of my colleagues, because I have been very vocal in the past year about promoting our area, the Cleveland, Toledo to Detroit corridor, to be the first in line for the FRA corridor money. But when I looked at the population between our corridor and the 3C corridor, like we say in quality improvement, you have to fit the policy to the data and not the other way around, or you'll make crappy policies. This is our population for Cleveland, Toledo, and Detroit corridor looks like, and this is just the Ohio population. There's smaller towns like Perrysburg, Rossford, and Oregon, so you can add 100,000 to that population figure. And then there's also 645,705 people for Detroit, and you're going to have around 1.6 million people. Here's what the 3C and D corridor look like. They have over 800,000 people more to work with, and that's not counting the smaller towns in their area like Crestview and stuff like that, anything under 50,000 people. Will the entire population switch to transit? Probably not. If I was the person sitting at the federal or state level and just looking strictly at the data, I would give the money to the 3C and D corridor strictly off population density, because it gives them the ability to develop more railroad revenue quicker by drawing off a larger population base. But our area still has cards to play. We need to continue with the Stage 2 corridor study, because having that deep dive into our passenger rail structure and costs is absolutely needed. We need to up our game to promote the importance of the Great Lakes Limited to Amtrak as a daily round-trip transit option. You can go onto our YouTube channel. Our November meeting has Bill Hutchinson doing a great job of explaining the particulars. There's a link in the chat for that. And it also highlights the importance of establishing a regional public banking system that not only improves our existing corridor, but also establish passenger rail lines going from Detroit through Toledo down to Columbus, or over to Fort Wayne, Indiana, like Larry, and South Bend, like Larry had suggested. We have an opportunity to establish banking at the state level for reasons that I've mentioned. But because rail improvement is not going to be cheap, now this is why I've been advocating we design our system for electrification now. Pushing this off while waiting for others to catch up will cost us more in the long run. This does not consider electrification of the system. This is just straight up rail and bus transit. And you can see in 2023, we're at 93 billion, but by 2045, it's going to be 336 billion, over a 200% increase. And that's actually 261. There's a lot to be said. I know I received a lot of pushback from my colleagues on this, but I believe there's things now that we can do proactively that will set us up when we electrify in the future. I'll get off my soapbox on that, but that's what we're looking at for the potential of rail transits and costs within Ohio. Our rail statistics still look good. We got people leaving Toledo increased in the first quarter of this year as opposed to last year, while people coming into Toledo increased as well. And despite this being a negative of 0.17, those February and March, we had made significant improvement of this year. We're going to be on the move some more. We're having a busy season now. First, on June 1st, we're going to be talking to One Voice for East Toledo about NOPRA and our goals. And with a little luck, we might be able to recruit a few members. It will be held at 6 p.m. at the Glass City Enrichment Center, 935 Front Street. June 12th and 13th, we are also looking at the White House Cherry Festival. Probably get a table there. Then on June 17th, we're going to be having a table and sponsoring the Ability Center's Access Summit. Hopefully, all this generates some potential membership. And then on June 20th and 21st, we're going to be in Holland, Ohio for the Strawberry Festival, having a booth there. And then last but not least, Rail Nation, and all this stuff you can find in links in the chat. We're going to be at least attending the thing. Hopefully we'll have a table there. Stu Nicholson will be presenting this at next week's meeting of the Lake Erie West Regional Passenger Rail Group. So he'll have more to talk to us about how we can support this endeavor. On to old business here. We have a donation account set up on our website, on our PayPal account, but we've been having some issues developing the membership button on that. Me and Lon are kind of knocking heads together, and we're looking at trying to get that up and running. Hopefully by next week or maybe even the week after, we'll have that up and running. Next thing is Toledo Train Day. Now, the one thing that the Ohio Rail Summit showed me was the importance to maintain and improve Toledo Train Day. After our meeting in March, I decided to slow walk our train day this year because I wanted to look at the Ohio Rail Summit for some ideas, and it gave me a few. The Passenger Rail Association Conference, which I'm looking at, will also allow me to have some more ideas, but we're going to start getting that ball rolling as of next week in order to bring back train day. The Rail Conference in Columbus and the conference coming up in October has shown me the importance maintaining and improving Toledo Train Day. And it will be held as usual on May 10th, the day of the Golden Spike. Stay tuned for that. And as you know, we purchased the computer and table and cover for the table. We're looking at a stand-up passenger rail thing, and this is kind of a mock-up of how it's going to look like. And we're going to be purchasing a standalone banner for these events there. New business, as Tom mentioned, we're developing a passenger rail class in two parts for elected officials and candidates, both being Zoom meetings, as he said. You might have noticed the slideshow being a little bit different. We're actually using Canva to do some of our marketing and graphic ideas. Speaking of ideas, we can use some ideas as to what kind of swag we should be. Frank's going on a little bit of I wouldn't say spending spree, but we need some ideas as to what kind of swag would be good for giving out at these events. And so your input would be greatly appreciated there. And so now we come to the event we all been waiting for. We want to hear from our friends. So Roger, did you want to say something, or was that what you brought up?
I'll keep it real brief. I know we're kind of running out of time. Glenn, from the remarks you made regarding the 3C plus D versus Cleveland to Detroit, the one thing to keep in mind is the incredible cost of the 3C plus D. It's a long corridor. A lot of it is freight rail that's going to need to be upgraded to carry passenger rail, whereas Cleveland to Toledo is already carrying passenger rail. So obviously that's, it's probably going to need a few improvements, but that's already in place. And then Toledo to Detroit will be using existing freight rail that is Class 1 railroad. I don't even know if any improvements would need to be made. And what is that, like a 50-mile trip between Toledo to Detroit? So cost-wise, if you look at those population numbers and then look at the cost, if you're looking at the cost per person, or I don't know how you want to divide it out, I think the Cleveland to Detroit corridor is low-hanging fruit for Amtrak, because developing that is going to be much, much less expensive than the 3C plus D. In fact, it's something maybe Amtrak would even do on their own without the ORDC or without Corridor ID, because they already have passengers that are traveling from Cleveland to Toledo and then taking a bus to Detroit. So there's already an established passenger capacity already there. So that's something to really consider if you're comparing those two projects. Another thing I wanted to mention was that Lake Erie West Regional Council, we used to be TMACOG, now we're Lake Erie West. We have applied for some grant money through Marcy Kapter's office to do a study looking at the east-west Amtrak corridor between Toledo and South Bend, Indiana. Just kind of study that corridor and see what improvements could be made. Is there an alternate route? Is there a way to connect it to the South Shore line? Just kind of taking a look at that whole corridor. So I'll keep everybody up to date if we hear anything on that grant money.
Roger, I talked to her a week or so ago, and she's been in contact with Pete Buttigieg about, who to contact and how we could extend that line from its eastern terminus right now, at least to this corridor.
So I'll keep you updated if we hear anything on that. And as Glenn mentioned, the May 21st Lake Erie West Passenger Rail meeting will be at 11 a.m. through Teams. We'll have Margaret Clark. She's the new area Amtrak representative for us. She'll be giving an overview of Amtrak things going on in Ohio and then answering your questions. And then Jim Matthews from the Rail Passenger Association will do a preview of the Rail Nation conference coming up in October 1st through 3rd. He'll also be asking for input on possible speakers and sessions. I'll put my email in the chat. If anybody is interested in attending that, shoot me an email and I'll send you the agenda and the Teams login. One thing to keep in mind, the registration is open for Rail Nation and the early bird rate ends on May 31st. So if you're thinking about attending, you may want to register before May 31st. Put my email address in the chat if you're interested in attending that meeting. Thank you.
Thanks for reminding me, Frank. We're going to have to talk about maybe spending some money on the early bird, because I believe it's $100 more. It's $99 now, and it's $199 if we miss the early bird session. We'll discuss it offline there.
Hey, Glenn.
Hey.
I was going to add some things too. So Roger said several of the things. I was going to say the Cleveland Toledo Detroit is going to cost a lot less to do. At least I expect that. And then the other thing is, when you were doing your population analysis, I mean, certainly city population is relevant, but metro area population is a lot more relevant. And Cleveland and Detroit in particular really get hit on that number. So I'm estimating that Ohio 3C and D is serving somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 million people. Like if you drew 30-minute drive circles around stations, Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit. I mean, Cleveland's 2 and change, Toledo's about 1 million, Detroit's about 4.5 million. So, I mean, they're in the same ballpark population-wise, thanks to how big Metro Detroit is. So I think if you looked at actual populations served, they're pretty similar. I mean, 3C and D, I think politically with serving the capital, there's a lot of arguments there, but it's going to cost more and it's not really going to serve that many more people.
Thank you.
Hey, Glenn, it's Hans Roserock. Good afternoon. Hey, some of the other events you might want to consider. I don't know. Besides being a passenger rail guy, I'm just a rail buff in general. The UP big boys coming through here twice, June 6th, July 15th. You may want to set up. I know that they got stops set up for Continental Ohio and at Fostoria at the rail park. It's going to overnight in Bellevue, but I don't think there's any setup for people to see it. But then it comes back through on the 15th with the same viewing. In fact, Continental is on the way back. It's going to be all day. It's going to be setting in Fostoria, but might be a good place, venues to set up your booth and talk to people. You're going to have people from all different stripes there. both sides of political aisle, old, young. And it's going to be a mob scene, in my opinion. And then we're Northwest Ohio, but there are stops, and this is the old nickel plate line. They're going to have stops in Northeast Ohio too.
Yeah, to add on to that, we had a meeting in Fostoria yesterday. We actually talked to Mayor Manel, and he said they're expecting a huge crowd in Fostoria. In fact, they're already trying to plan how they're going to control the crowd and figure out what they're going to do with that, because he said they're expecting a lot of people in Fostoria to see that train. So if you are planning, I would go like the day before and camp out. Just trying to find a place to be able to see it there is going to be difficult, and the traffic is going to be a mess.
Thanks, Hans. Thanks, Raj.
And yeah, I just wanted to follow up on from the Transportation Summit for next year. I think we're going to be planning around February or March. We don't have a date set yet. We're going to be meeting about that in the coming months. I do know that we were talking about celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Toledo Skyway Bridge, the Veterans Last City Skyway. So if anyone here wants to talk on maybe something as far as history of rail, passenger rail, I think we'll be willing to be open for speakers. If you want to keep that in mind, by about October, I think we're going to want to start lining up speakers for the summit. So if there is something that's related to passenger rail that kind of relates to the history of Toledo, shoot me a message. You've got my email. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. Now, next, we got our buddy Bill Hutchinson, who wanted to say a few words there. So, Bill, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I'll try to make it brief. I'm hearing a lot about the bank idea. I think it's a terrific thought, Glenn. As you and I talk privately about this, I think this is a really great way to go. I think we need to look at any and all possibilities and not limit ourselves to one thing or another. Broadly speaking, the only thing that I would caution is that if this idea catches, we need to be cognizant that the highway lobby will probably want a chunk of it, and that's not going to help us. So we have to watch out for that kind of thing. And going back to what we've been doing, basically, we've had conversations with anybody who would listen when it comes to advocacy. Lisa Buffo asked the question, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, really, we need to attack everywhere at once. Leave no stone unturned, look for workarounds, any kind of thing to hang your hat on, which is part of the reason why we developed the Great Lakes Limited proposal, which, if you don't know, is a call for a daytime Detroit, Toledo, Cleveland, Buffalo, Albany, New York train. You should be familiar with that. I gave the presentation here a little while back. But the beauty of that is that it avoids having to go to the state of Ohio for support. If Amtrak drives this thing, which they could, if they find that it might produce positive cash flow. According to an article that was in Trains Magazine last fall, one of their people was saying that very thing, that they know all their NEC departures produce positive cash flow. And so they're going to look at some state and long distance routes. And they didn't say which ones, they didn't say what kind of timeline, but the idea is floating around out there. They did acknowledge that the equipment shortage is a problem, but I think that as new aero train sets come online, you're going to see a lot of old Amfleets and Amfleet 2 cars available. So that may not be such an issue by the time this thing got rolling. The other thing about this is also is that, we need to go back to the idea of the Great Lakes Authority, particularly if the election in November produces results that are amenable to that. We need to revisit that with Marcy Kaptur. That is a major, major thing for us. If we have an authority in the Great Lakes Basin, that would be very helpful, not just for us, but for a lot of different things. I was told that this is one of the few regions of the country that do not have an authority of this sort. This is something that needs to be done. Now, also, I think at the same time, coincidentally, or in conjunction with, there should be a joint powers authority or some other regional entity across northern Ohio. The trouble with that is that you need to do a lot of legwork to get it established. It has to be approved by the legislature, which is hard to say whether that would happen or not, given the political state in Ohio. But it's something that should be tried. Go to the MPOs to help organize that. Maybe 10 years or so ago, NOACA did put out a Dear MPO letter to its counterparts in northern Ohio to do that very thing. I don't think it went anywhere, but that was a thought at the time. And I've got a copy of that letter here if you guys want to see it. But I think that those things are what we should be looking at as a way to keep focus on the quarter ID for Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit. Rightfully so. AAO is really immersed with the 3CD. They only have so much money and so many resources. So and that was common to the way it was when I was president. Such a major focus that it left little energy for anything else. And that's kind of where NOPRA and the Lakeshore Rail Alliance and other people can come into play. We could help in that regard. And I think we need to do our own advocacy for Cleveland, Toledo, Detroit. There's no guarantee that the state's going to do anything with either one, but we'd have a lot better chance if we did some advocacy up here. There's a couple of other things, maybe we need to throw out ideas. What about working through the Turnpike Commission? What about designating Toledo to Cleveland as a regional transit line so you can access transit funding? There's a lot of different ways to attack this beast, and the Great Lakes Limited is one way to do that. We want to get a dialogue with Amtrak going. To do that, what we've been doing is talking to a number of people in Congress, probably 10 or 12 so far. There may be a Dear Colleague letter coming out soon, hopefully. And if it does, that'll bring these people together to work on a common agenda to talk to Amtrak about what would be needed to start a train of this sort. So that is pretty much what's going on. There have been many meetings, generally good support. On the 20th, we went to Buffalo to the GBNRTC, the MPO, the Buffalo MPO. They just established a rail committee. They were very welcoming. We're part of the committee now, believe that? Pretty good. We mentioned looking at Buffalo West. They received that very well, and they're going to make it part of their agenda. What this committee does is it recommends actions to the GBNRTC board. This is really a key win for us. We also talked to staffers for Congressman Tim Kennedy and Senator Gillibrand. Kind of funny, we didn't think that we went over too well. They were kind of guarded. But then the next thing you know, we got a message from Gillibrand's staff. They were really excited to talk to us again. So we had a Zoom call. And we talked to them about all this stuff. There's been a dialogue since then. I don't know what's going to come out of it, but it's indicative of a lot of interest out there. I think on New York's part, the 90B plan for the Empire Corridor has kind of stagnated, and it needs a jump start. And I think this might be one way to do that. And I think that's going to help in Ohio. If it happens and Amtrak drives it, the beauty of it is, like I said, it bypasses the states, it bypasses the corridor ID process. It's just a single train. You don't need new stations, you don't need new servicing, you need equipment, but it should come online. So it's something that we're really pushing, looking at beyond all this. One of the things that's on our radar now is we just learned when we were in Buffalo that there is a Ralph C. Wilson Foundation. Ralph Wilson was the owner of the Buffalo Bills football team. And since he passed away, they established this foundation. The interesting thing about the foundation is that it is focused on Detroit and it's focused on Buffalo. It's also unusual in that the funds that they have are supposed to be all spent by 2035. So it sunsets. And two of their major focuses are, believe this or not, supporting nonprofits and also economic development. The people who are restoring the Buffalo Central Terminal building just got a $4 million grant for that very purpose to fund their staff. That's something that really perked our ears. We are going to go back and talk to the foundation's people to see what it is exactly they need. I think one thing we are going to need is a local buy-in from local interests and funders. So we're going to make the rounds and try to see if we can raise some funding to show that we're serious players. I think that's about it, except to say that Roger's remarks were exactly why we're talking about the Great Lakes Limited in terms of capital costs. It's very important. And I think it's important for us to think regionally to as great a degree as possible. So, and I see, Tom, you have a question, so I'll answer you.
Question and a comment. If we're talking to people in Michigan, I know that Marcy has a good working relationship with the junior senator from Michigan, Elsa Slotnick. She was down here with Marcy 3 weeks ago, and I talked to them both. And the other thing is, if we're talking to the folks in Buffalo, my concern, I have a friend that's an Amtrak engineer working out of Albany. He works the extra board, so he works Albany West, Albany North, Albany South, Albany East. And CSX is letting some of that track either degrade or they're pulling it out that had been the 4-track main from Albany to Chicago. We should try to do everything we can through the NPOs and through the legislature to try to stop that or ameliorate it so there's sidings up there that can be used either for the Amtrak trains to run through at a reasonable speed, or they can put their 30,000 ton 2.5 mile long freight trains in and get our trains through if we're going to increase the traffic on that line, at least that CSX owns.
Yeah, let me address that because I think the problem is going to be if Amtrak decides they're going to do this, they're going to have to negotiate with CSX, and you know what that's like. As far as those sidings go, this is all old jointed rail mostly. A lot of it's already gone. I don't think you'd have to replace it anyway. To bring it up to passenger standards. If you look at the 90B plan, what they're talking about is a third dedicated mainline track all the way across from Schenectady to Buffalo. So obviously it would be totally re-engineered. The thing to be concerned about is CSX's stance, and also that the right of way be kept intact. And I think it will be. It's plenty wide. There's one spot, there's a bridge that goes over the Seneca River up there, a double bridge. It was two-track bridges, and they took one of them out. So they're going to have to build a new bridge, but that's not going to be for many years. And this is just one train again. Gary Proffitt, the head of ESPA, tells me that freight traffic is down maybe 30% over the years when Conrail ran it. It's the same railroad. So it may not be as much of an obstacle as people might think. But at the bottom of it, it's CSX property, and they can do what they want with it, and they do.
Yeah, I was wondering how we could get the power of the Great Lake Authority to be behind what we're trying to do. If anybody has any ideas, I'd like to know, because I think we should be using that, because the reason why it came into existence, and Marcy made sure it did, is because so that we can compete for funding. Let's get the funding and do something.
Yeah, I agree 100% on that. We just have to wait and see what the election brings. If the Democrats win the House, then I'd say you got a good chance of something happening. Right now, with the change of administration in 24 there, it became kind of a dead letter. So it's there, but it's just they didn't fill any of the vacancies that were created for it, positions, job descriptions. There was somebody they had lined up that was going to be the executive director, and it never happened. So got caught in the last election. We'll just have to see what happens. I don't know. But certainly we need to have a dialogue with people in Captor's office about that and stay on it so that they don't lose focus. And I think that's one problem we see is that you'll have a meeting and it's all good, but then people get sidetracked with all their other issues and we get left. So we need to just keep prodding these people anytime you see them. So, I definitely would suggest that all of us, contact staffers at Captor's office and bring up that issue, get that Great Lakes Authority active.
Ancillary to what we're talking about is the National Infrastructure Bank is going to be doing a presentation for the T&I folks in Washington, D.C. on the 19th, and they're providing lunch. Staffers tend to go for free lunches, and they'll be talking to people about National Infrastructure Bank. And like I said, 20% of that is passenger and high-speed rail. Talk to your representatives and tell them to show up or send their staffers for a free lunch and some good information. That's on the 19th.
Is that going to be video saved so we can see it, or any kind of information? Do you know?
I don't know. All I know is that they're presenting to the staffers in the T&I conference room.
Okay.
I don't know if there's going to be anything public or maybe something sent out afterwards.
Might be on C-SPAN.
I'll shoot an email over to Alpaca if she considered
she would
recording
know.
it.
Yeah, she would know. A little bit more about this possibility of a grant request. We want it to be big enough to bring on a couple of staff people, an executive director and an assistant, who would work this whole region across northern Ohio and over to Buffalo, Detroit, and Chicago. There's another component of that would be funding to pay for a economic impact study by Scioto Analysis, the same people that did the 3CD study. That study is going to be probably around $45,000 to do. But it's gonna have numbers for every community on the lakeshore route. So it'd be a
Perfect.
real tool to help us build a case. So that's what's going on that front. So lots of pieces, lots of meetings. Retirement, what's that?
Yeah. Seeing how it's getting like to be 3:27 here. Anybody else have anything quickly for the order? Hearing none, then I'm going to take a chair's privilege and say just one more thing. This is the kind of discussion that I'd like to have moving forward in all phases. I've gone to a few things. This is not a criticism, it's an observation that we need to start drilling down a little bit because when we were talking about population density, Brian made up some good points. Roger made up some good points. We need this deeper dive. It seems like when we have these things, we talk a little bit, and this is why I made it an hour and a half, so we could actually drill down a little bit as to what the problems are, what the studies are, and try to do a little bit of problem solving. I'll get off my soapbox on that. If nobody else has anything, then thank you all for coming.